The situation is precarious, as you just saw, and the contrast with history is stark. Iraq was at the center stage of civilization at one point. It was home to some of the first and the greatest cities in the world. Babylon was called the jewel of the ancient world. Today, it is in ruins. The last few decades have been challenging and riddled with wars, but nothing was as damaging as America's war on terror. The war that dethroned Saddam Hussein on a false pretext and left an entire country in deadly chaos.
16 years, over 2 lakh civilians killed, the bulk of them women and children. Over 4,500 US military personnel dead, and a country in a shambles. This is Iraq 16 years after the US invasion. 16 years of despair and destruction. So why was Iraq invaded? The reason was oil and the excuse was 9/11. Soon after the attacks in the US, President George W. Bush identified his target. Iraq was put in the axis of evil. The US alleged a nexus between Iraq and Al-Qaeda and lied to the world about Saddam Hussein's sinister plans.
I take the threat very seriously. I take the fact that he develops weapons of mass destruction very seriously. I remember the fact that he has invaded 2 countries before. I know for a fact that he's poisoned his own people. He doesn't believe in the worth of each individual. He doesn't believe in public dissent. I look forward to a dialogue.
And his Secretary of State repeated this infamous lie before the UN.
The burden remains on Iraq, not on the United Nations, not on the United States. The burden remains on Iraq to cooperate fully and for Iraq to prove to the international community whether it does or does not have weapons of mass destruction. We are convinced they do until they prove to us otherwise.
The same US government that armed Iraq was now accusing it of developing WMDs. And so America struck Iraq, hunted down its rulers, plundered its oil, ran out of patience, took the moral high ground, and left Baghdad in chaos to fend for itself.
Today, I've come to speak to you about how the war in Iraq will end. To understand where we need to go in Iraq, it's important for the American people to understand where we now stand. Thanks in great measure to your service and your sacrifice and your family's sacrifices, the situation in Iraq has improved.
This shock and awe foreign policy of the US has another dimension. It's called loot and scoot. Be it Iraq, Afghanistan, or Syria, that's precisely the blueprint. What's worse, the man who triggered the Iraq crisis is now calling Trump's foreign policy poor.
They need to get a grip. And when they see things that are not right, they need to say something about it. Because our foreign policy is a shambles right now, in my humble judgment. And I see things happening that are hard to understand.
That's rich coming from Colin Powell. Iraq is paying for the lies of his government. The political and economic instability continues. And the numbers don't lie. Economic activity has fallen despite high oil prices. This is because of a lack of investments. The climate of conflict is deterring all private investments. Power supply has fallen in the oil-rich nation. Before the US invasion, Iraqis got electricity 18 hours a day. They now get it barely 8 hours a day. Food production has fallen. Now the country is flooded with imported fruits, vegetables, and cereals. The war has also destroyed Iraq's vibrant industries and private sector. Some of the biggest private firms have been shut. Washington says it has spent hundreds of billions on Iraq, but reports show that US contractors siphoned off most of the money. Saddam's weapons were never found, while a prolonged mass destruction has been unleashed on Iraq. Bureau Report, WION World is One.